The Way We Were was my first producing job. I was working at Comunicado. They'd done series 1, which was very successful, but I thought it was a little boring. And so when I came in for series 2, I said I'd do it, but I wanted to jazz it up. And what I did was we threw out all the scripts. And I said to Paul Holmes, who was an incredibly good improvisational speaker, you ad-lib, you tell us the way we were, you personalise it. So that was the formula. We had this archive, we had Holmes at his peak, and it was a fantastic entry-level production. The thing about the Understudy which appealed to me was the fact that I knew Simon O'Neill. He was a family friend, so I had access. I didn't have to go through the usual, this is me, this is where we come from. But also I knew that, and Simon happily would say this, he's got the most fantastic sense of ego in theatre in the world. So he was great talent. You know, I think any story you've got to have great talent, and Simon was magic. So I put the idea of his natural talent, which is extraordinary. I mean, Placido Domingo doesn't just endorse any old singer, any old tenor. I knew nothing of opera, by the way, still know very little, but Simon, when we went to New York and filmed him, was an absolute natural environment, and he was respected by his peers. So it was a no-brainer. Simon, New York, the television camera, Placido Domingo, it was magic. Out of the Blue was a feature film, and it came about because for 3 years previously I'd had a project in development with Working Title, and it was a big ambitious project which scaled many years, and at the end of the day it fell into the too hard basket. Very, very disappointed by this. Wandered down Ponsonby Road, went into a second-hand bookstore and guided divinely, as it were, to the Aramoana story by a retired policeman called Bill O'Brien. And I think truly what attracted me to the story was, A, I knew nothing about it. As I was skimming it, I was sort of drawn into the incredible heroism by ordinary people. And if I'm really honest, I also think the fact that it took place over 24 hours. So it was a complete antithesis to the big Working Title project, the mammoth, sprawling, you know, beast that didn't get off the ground. So 24 hours seemed instinctively the way to tell a story. And Bill's book absolutely captured it. So we didn't justify or explain where David Gray had come from. We didn't go into the post-tragedy lives of the people. It was just those 24 hours. It was a clean, compelling story. Very early on in the piece, we had a public meeting in Aramoana, which was one of the saddest experiences because people were begging us, tears down their face, not to make the film. We said that we felt the story was a project that we would handle sensitively and honestly. But of course, no, they didn't know us. We were out of towners, particularly we were from Auckland. We had so many sort of, you know, instinctive, you know, crosses against us. And yet, while they didn't want us to make it, the people were magnificent. They never obstructed us. They never stopped us. They'd made their request. We heard it in respect and said, no, we're going to go ahead. The one thing we did was we said we'd engage them in the process as much as we could without ceding editorial control. And so we showed them the script to check on any errors of fact. And also they requested the title we changed because it then had the working title of Aramoana. And so they said no, and so we agreed to that and we took that out. And when we had the screening, they had the first screening, the surviving family members had the first private screening, and then the community at large had its own screening in the cinema in Dunedin, and we never got one letter or phone call or negative comment from any of them. So I think, in that respect, I don't know to this day whether they liked or disliked what we did, but their response was truly magnanimous. Again, with $1 Million Tumour, we had the access to the subject. It wasn't someone who we'd read about, and we door knocked them. It was through a friend of a friend. I knew Dave, and again, I've never discussed it even with his family, but I suspect, even though he had the most incredible fight in the will to live, maybe subconsciously Dave knew he wasn't going to grow old bones, because the access he allowed us, the intimacy. There hadn't been in a New Zealand documentary up until that stage, basically the journey of a man to his death. So it was an incredibly privileged story to tell. And again, I think with this and a couple of other things we've done, sometimes the best way to tell a story, it's scary, is to just have a camera, a trusted crew, and it's really important that the crew are sensitive and really emotionally sensitive and very intelligent to the rhythms of the character you're spending time with, because they are characters. They're real people, but they're also characters. And then what you want to do is spend time with them, and don't try and stage or manufacture the situation. So just go with them, because what happens is you will come to circumstances and situations that reveal themselves and add the shades and drama to your story, rather than having to try and make them happen. Reluctant Hero happened because we got a phone call after following the New Zealand SAS, who for the first time ever had allowed a documentary crew to have sustained access to them. So we got to know them over a couple of years. And the SAS have a phrase that says stranger danger. After 2 or 3 years, we were no longer a stranger. We'd proven ourselves to them. So that when they knew that Willie Appiatta was about to get the Victoria Cross, they wanted someone who they could trust effectively to follow the story to its natural conclusion. The thing is, no one knew what the natural conclusion was. And so the identification of Willie had been made by the Defence Force and the New Zealand government, so that wasn't our issue to worry about. What was really critical, though, was how do you tell the story without making it a hagiography? But when someone wins the Victoria Cross in the way that Willie won it, clearly it's not just for an ordinary day out in the Afghanistani countryside. This Is Not My Life was a great project because it was one I didn't instigate. It fell out of the sky. There are a couple of brand name writers in New Zealand, 2 or 3, and 2 of them, Rachel Lang and Gavin Strawn, approached me and Tim White, who also produced Out of the Blue with me, and so the 4 of us got together, and Gavin and Rachel had a couple of projects that they thought had merit. We looked at them, and This Is Not My Life was the project. So it was really, really great. Scripts already existed, clever people brought it to you, hard-working people made it better, the network ticked it off really early on. So it was my first experience of being an executive producer, and so what that meant particularly was that the physical production side, which was handled by Tim Sanders, and Gavin and Rachel as the showrunners effectively was easy. Well, nothing's ever easy, but it was, real pros doing it. My job was to sell it. So, and that was a great story. So I went up to the States thinking, oh, well, look, I liked Mad Men at the time. I thought, well, their producers must be good people. So Lionsgate got a knock on the door from me, and ultimately they picked it up. That was exciting. We got 1 series. It got average ratings, and like so many New Zealand dramas, unless there's sustained eyeballs, it gets turned off very quickly, because the networks are reluctant to go with any show that doesn't have that real potential to be a 2nd series or a 3rd series. So, and it was expensive by New Zealand standards. It was 13 parts, and it was really hard and disappointing to get the news that there wasn't going to be a 2nd series. But as I said, it's now with Lionsgate, and the Americans, with their superior financial resources, they've got a draft script. It's with a major network. Hopefully, it'll get realised there. And I think this is the big challenge for New Zealanders: is that our production ability here is quite tiny by world standards, and certain projects do need to go offshore to be fully realised, because it just ain't the coin here to do it. Harry is a 20-year dream to effectively make a New Zealand cracker, to some extent a New Zealand prime suspect. We've been compared since its series has been out for the last 2 weeks to shows like The Wire and Sopranos, which is wonderful to hear. Personally, they're such amazing shows, I wouldn't draw that comparison. But we've struck a chord with New Zealanders. And one of the things in the story is, and this is part of our submission to New Zealand On Air, we wanted to show the New Zealand that we see out of our office windows, out of our bus windows, out of our kitchen windows. In other words, the New Zealand that is out there, not a fictionalised, sort of a Sydney-like New Zealand or a Los Angeles-like, which is all fine and dandy. But for our show, we wanted the realism. And also because crime, unfortunately, is just such a huge, huge, huge part of the New Zealand experience. We're an angry country. We do really awful things to our fellow citizens. And I felt there'd never been a New Zealand crime drama that really reflected that. So that was the genesis of it. And one day watching Oscar on stage with the Naked Samoans, it was like, bang, there's my star. So Oscar plus natural environment equals hit TV show.